Welcome back to our Q&A segment here with Bruce Malone, a scientist who believes in creation and God. Why do scientists believe rocks are billions of years old? And this is an easy question for all of us to have at an early age.
Sure. Because we hear that. We hear it on the movies and the television programs and the museums, and it's just presented as a fact. It's a fact that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Now, the primary method scientists use to come to that conclusion is something called radiometric dating. Now, think of radiometric dating as like sand flowing through a sand timer. They'll find all sorts of rocks, granite and schist and various forms of basalt and lava. And it contains lots of chemical elements. Some of these elements are very stable. Some of them are unstable. They're in various ways what we would call radioactive, which means they're flying apart. And we can measure how fast these elements are flying apart. They're just disappearing and turning into other elements. It's like sand flowing out of the top of a sand timer and the bottom of a sand timer. You might start out with uranium in the top, and everybody knows uranium's radioactive. It flies apart. And you end up with lead in the bottom, which is very stable, and it's just going to stay lead. So you've got uranium and the sand in the top, lead is the sand in the bottom. Well, you grab a rock, and at a certain moment, it's like you're stopping the sand timer. You can measure how much uranium is in the top, you can measure how much lead is in the bottom, and you can measure how fast that sand is flowing from the top to the bottom. Every dating method has the amount of something divided by the rate at which it's changing. So you divide the amount of sand, the rate at which it's flowing. When you do that division, you come up with billions of years. So they say, aha, we've proven the rocks are billions of years old. Now, let me explain these dating methods in a really, really simple way so everybody understands, even if they're not a scientist or a mathematician. Suppose one day I go out to read the Bible, and I'm sitting there, reading God's Word, and a friend comes walking along, and I know my friend lives 21 miles away in a town that's 21 miles away. And it's 6 a.m. in the morning, and most people, if they're walking at a leisurely pace, it's about 3 miles per hour. So the distance is 21. The rate at which that distance is changing is 3 miles every hour. To calculate a time, you divide the amount divided by the rate. 21 is the amount divided by 3 miles per hour. 21 divided by 3 is?
7.
7 hours. He has been walking for 7 hours. I have just used a dating method to measure the passage of time from when he left, except it's 6 o'clock in the morning. That means he left at 11 o'clock last night. Why would he do that? How do I know the amount of time that has passed? I would have to know everything. I would have to know that he hasn't taken a shortcut. That would be like a contamination of the amount. I would have to know that he started at his home. Maybe his car broke down right around the corner and he's been walking for 10 seconds. I'm off by 1,000 times in my time estimate because I didn't get the starting point right. How do I know that he didn't take up marathon running and he's been running at 7 miles an hour? So it's only been 3 hours, not 7 hours.
Great question.
You understand? Unless I know everything, I can't know I have the amount of time right. People who use radiometric dating, they can't know these things. You see, the only possible scientific way of knowing how much time has passed is if someone was there to see an event happen, and then they told us when that event happened, and by their very nature, they were incapable of lying. You understand we're talking about the formation of the universe. The only one there to see it happen is God. And by his nature, he can't lie, and he told us when it happened. And Christians just flippantly ignore it and pretend it doesn't say what it says because some scientist has come up with some other alternative method. Now, there are enormous problems with these billions of years radiometric dating. We have had lava flows that have come up into the Grand Canyon as recently as 100 years ago. We've seen the lava flow over the edge of the canyon. We've grabbed pieces of this lava and measured it, and it says that rock is 1 billion years old. It's 100 years old.
So what do they do with that?
They make excuses. They will say, well, that's because that material that the lava was made out of came from deep in the earth where it really was 1 billion years old. So that's why we got the wrong answer. Well, then we have to ask, well, then how do you know that other lava flows aren't wrong also. How do you know those other rock layers you're measuring at 1 billion years old aren't, recently flowed out in the midst of Noah's flood, and the flood happened 5,000 years ago? They don't have an answer to that question. It's all assumptions. But there's an even bigger problem. About half of these radiometric dating methods, when they happen, when the uranium is transformed into lead, they spit out what's called an alpha particle, which is a helium nucleus, which grabs an electron and immediately forms helium. So just keep in mind what I'm telling you.
Okay.
These radioactive decay methods are true. They're happening. Molecules are disintegrating. They do happen at a rate we see happening often today. But every time that radioactive decay happens, it forms helium. The helium is trapped in the rocks. Well, a little over 10 years ago, a group of scientists, and Dr. Russell Humphreys is one of these, worked for Sandia National Laboratories. He thought, I got to figure out, why are we getting the wrong dates? Why are they indicating huge periods of time? And he decided, let's see how much helium is left. So the rock has been formed sometime. I would take, based on a biblical viewpoint, that in those early days of creation, when God was forming the earth, he formed the rock layers of the earth that formed the earth in order to build an environment that mankind could then live on. He created various ways that things work, including probably radioactive decay, although maybe at the time of the fall, that's when a lot of this radioactive decay happened. But it happened. We see the evidence in the rocks. So helium was formed in those rocks at some point in the past. Ever had a helium balloon?
Yes.
You filled it up, and just a rubber helium balloon, it floats on the ceiling. Is it still floating on the ceiling the next day?
No.
The helium comes right out through the rubber. How about when you put metal around that helium, and now you got a metallized balloon? It floats a little longer, doesn't it? But a year from now, is it still floating?
No.
The helium works its way right through a layer of aluminum. See, all gases are in constant motion. All solids are in constant motion. The nucleus of an atom is like my fist, just conceptually. The electrons, they're the size of a BB, they're a mile away, floating around the nucleus. And everything in between is empty space, and everything's vibrating. So helium will work its way right through a solid metal. You could put helium in a stainless steel container and predict exactly how many molecules are going to come out every hour, right through the metal. That's just the way reality is. It's what we know about solids are actually not solid. They're mostly empty space. So that's a known constant of science. You can't stop it. You can't change it. Helium is going to work its way. You can look up how fast it's going to come out through any solid, given the given temperature. So he measured the amount of helium that was formed in these rocks, because we know the amount of uranium you started out, the amount of lead that's left, how much helium was made. He measured the rate at which helium comes out of these rock crystals. That had never been done, but he had it measured. He divided the amount by the rate, and that would tell us, when did that helium form? How old is that rock? An amount divided by the rate, it's a constant of science. He did it with granite, one of the most common rocks of the earth, did it at various places all over the earth. He discovered that those rocks could not scientifically possibly be older than 6,000 years because there's so much helium left. If it had been millions of years ago, there wouldn't be a molecule of helium left. But there's enormous amounts left because that radioactive decay happened recently. Probably during the fall, or during the stretching out period when God was stretching out the universe, or during the flood, there was a rapid radioactive decay that happened. But that means it all happened rapidly, like our car that just was recently stopped, or the runner that ran at high speeds, and now we see a slow rate of decay. But the fact the helium's still there means those rocks can't be millions of years old. So these methods don't prove the age of things. They're all based on assumptions, whether they give a young age or an old age. But the vast majority of them indicate a recent creation, like the fact the helium is still there in the rocks. So the truth is on the side of what God has told us all along. Recently, and in a 6 literal day period, God created the heavens and the earth and all that they contain.